Good morning or afternoon, evening, whenever you guys are watching this thing. What we want to do this morning is, I'm Zach Teasdale. This is Chris Clausen.
Howdy.
What we want to do with you guys today is just walk through a little bit of what we're going to be looking at with small groups this week. We're looking at friendship today between David and Jonathan. Got a couple different things that we'll be talking about. And what we're really looking at is why friendship is such an important part, and then how do you have those good friendships, and then how do you deepen those friendships? Because we know for sure that in the States, many people are struggling with friendships. They're struggling to have them, gain them, have them be what they want them to be. Some people have acquaintanceships, but they really want friendships. They haven't figured out how to get there, and there's some things that get in the way. We really want small groups to be friends, which seems crazy, but it's what we want. And so we're looking at David and Jonathan today. And because holy cow, what good friends. We both kind of know the story. We've looked at the story. And so we're not going to read it in front of you guys here today or read it for you guys today.
Right.
You'll hear us talk enough. But Jonathan ultimately, in the chapter before this, takes off his belt, his sword, all that stuff, and he gives it to David. Mm-hmm. And then we see in this chapter 2, Jonathan knows that his kingdom is going to be given to David, and he's okay with it. So Chris, I'm just going to kind of start with you. Why do you think that Jonathan is willing to give up his kingdom to David?
I appreciate that question. I think the reality of it actually is that Jonathan knows it's not his kingdom anyway. And I don't mean in that, the kingly lineage sense. I just think that Jonathan had some sort of keen awareness that God's in charge, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah.
And so Jonathan, I think, is sold out to God's mission, whatever that is, and God's guy, whoever that is. We can dig back into his past a little bit. His dad, Saul, was like, way up and down king. Like, there were moments that he was kingly, but there were definitely a lot of moments where it's like, what are you doing? And I remember actually doing a little Bible study with a friend about that moment when Samuel, the prophet who had anointed Saul, basically says, well, yeah, that was the will of the people. And Samuel and God are talking, and Samuel learns from God, David's my guy. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing a synopsis just way too big. Go look it up. But it's a fascinating story where Saul is still king. David's essentially declared that he's going to be the next king. Jonathan knows this, and Jonathan is like, you know what, I'm sold out to whatever God wants to do.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge quality in their friendship, and that's a huge quality that's valuable in maybe any friendship.
Yeah. So I think that as you're looking at those friendships, that's starting with Jonathan. It's starting. He's looking at his relationship with God, and he's kind of being like, well, if God wants David to be king, I want David to be king.
Right.
Even though it's going to affect me hugely, right? And he ends up dying for it. So Jonathan's one of my favorite characters in the Bible.
Yeah.
Because he just serves God and then dies.
Pretty much.
I mean, the glory, that kind of stuff isn't there so much. But he's willing to do that and play that part.
Yeah.
Because of his relationship with God.
Well, and so I think as you read through the text, the whole story, you kind of get the idea that David's leadership qualities are somehow knowable by the people around him. Like, it's discernible that David is a leader among people.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Right? And so Jonathan may or may not have had those qualities, and I don't think we I don't think we even get the privilege of knowing that exactly, but I think what we get is Jonathan recognizing that even a strong leader needs a wingman,
Mm-hmm.
right? And their relationship was very much a high level friendship. It wasn't like, you don't want to imagine Jonathan being like a servant necessarily, because
Yeah.
it wasn't that there wasn't that much dominance, I don't think, in between them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was very much a, hey, okay, together we're going to do this thing and it'll be better. And I just get that feeling through it. Right? Like David would have been less if Jonathan hadn't been in his life.
Dude, that's really good. So that actually takes me a different direction than what I was thinking. So I'm gonna kind of jump back, kind of for our small group leaders' sake, and then I want to go your direction.
Sure.
But what I'm thinking is that so it's mutually beneficial, or it's at least beneficial for the kingdom,
For sure,
what they're
yeah.
doing. But it's not necessarily super beneficial for Jonathan in the long run. It could be. I mean, it could be. And I
He
guess
wouldn't have known that,
right,
you know, but
right. But if Jonathan, this is risky for Jonathan, I think, to some extent. He's trusting God
for sure.
in the eternal kind of aspect, right? So,
Yeah.
but in the immediate, like, kind of earthly aspect, this is risky.
Yep.
Because he's giving up all of his power, all his authority, right? If God's wrong here, Jonathan really gets played for a chump, right?
For sure.
If God doesn't exist, or if God's wrong,
For sure.
like, he just lost his kingdom, right?
Right.
So there's a ton of trust. So if God is right, then there's very little risk. But when we look at that for our sake, I think that's a really difficult thing. When Jonathan's willing to give up this kingdom for this, it's a risk, it's scary, it's sacrificial, which I think is how friendships grow, right? So this is, it's not like we're all giving up a kingdom, but in every way, when we're starting to develop friendships, there's risks involved, right?
Right.
I'm going to go grab coffee with somebody who I don't know maybe, and I risk 2 hours of being wasted, right? Because maybe this friendship doesn't pan out.
Sure.
Or maybe this person doesn't get along with one of my other friends. Or maybe I'm going to risk sharing a personal note or like some vulnerability, and maybe they're going to abuse that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess what I'm thinking then too is learning this from David and Jonathan, how does that trust in God play a part in those other friendships and taking those risks to grow this closer bond between people in your small group, right? How do you take those risks there?
So, yeah, that's a really thought-provoking question.
Because we're scared a lot of times.
Well,
right?
that's
Which is why
where-
we don't.
Yeah, that's where the challenge, I think, really is for people cut from certain cloth. I'm going to use myself as an example, probably. A little more introverted than people would assume, or might assume, and a little bit less open than I appear to be,
Right,
right?
right,
So I don't give myself to those kinds of risks
right,
freely.
right.
So I think what Jonathan does better than me is understand the big picture and understand the value of honoring what God wants to do
Right.
and aligning himself. I mean, he recognized what position he had already. Like, Saul was king, wanted to kill David once it came out that
Right.
David was going to take over, essentially. And Jonathan had a choice. Right? Well, I'm in line,
Right.
or it's not right that my dad wants to kill David and I need to let David know.
Right.
Because he's not thinking about that right now. So, I don't want to get back to your question. Sorry, I'm kind of meandering.
No,
here,
you're good.
Jonathan's life was full of risk.
Right.
Like, even from those moments,
Right.
And I wonder if he was comfortable taking certain risks But also, he had seen, experienced, evidenced David, maybe in battle or maybe just in regular life,
Yeah.
and understood this guy is flawed but faithful,
Right.
right? Which is the best that any of us could hope
Right.
for.
Right.
That if that's true about me, then I'll celebrate that because I know I'm flawed.
Right.
Can I be faithful to
Right.
it? So he sees, and David is a real guy, but he's faithful,
Yeah.
and I can invest in that.
Right.
And so I wonder how much of, on both their parts, David and Jonathan, I wonder how much was like a total purposeful investment. Like, you know
Right.
what? God trusts this guy.
Right.
God's got a plan. My chips are in. I'm in.
Right.
And God can handle the risk. And I think that's the lesson for me, is when God ordains something,
Right.
he can handle the risk that I'm worried about.
Right.
That took a long, I'm sorry everybody,
You're
that
good.
took a long time for me to get to that point, but I think that's the point of it.
Right.
God can handle the risk that I'm concerned with.
God can handle the risk that I'm concerned with. I gotta repeat that because that was good.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna wrap up here in a sec. But I think about this a little bit. You and I both work on the church staff. We work together. We kind of come from a little bit of different backgrounds.
Totally.
Man, I drop in Chris's office on a regular basis to get his input and honestly just even work through some of my emotions, failures, difficulties sometimes.
Yeah.
I didn't start that right off the bat, and I was probably nervous to talk to you about different things because if you go and run and start yapping to everybody else, right?
Right.
That you might be able to make me look bad, right? I mean, there's a risk to it, or you might judge me and try and undermine me at different areas, right?
Yeah.
And some of that's evidence based on how you act, so it's calculated risks, and some of it's like, you know what, I can have this friendship with Chris. It's going to be risky. If Chris abuses that, God can handle that, right?
Right.
God can still take care of me.
Right.
But He wants us as a church and as friends in a church, as a community of believers, to belong to each other.
Right.
I mean, to have an incredibly deep relationship that you can only have within the church that's full of forgiveness and that kind of stuff. And that's something that we want our small groups to experience. Is these great, thriving, meaningful friendships, but they're risky, and it takes time to get there. It takes risks to get there.
It does.
And that's only, you're only going to take those risks, right? I think, if you're sitting there enjoying God.
I see Jesus in Jonathan. Because, and then there's an example, obviously, in that for us, and that is the willfulness of being vulnerable. You have to be open in that kind of relationship. How I see Jesus in Jonathan is Jesus made himself entire. I mean, this is God we're talking about. He made himself entirely vulnerable
Right.
unto death
Oh man, yeah.
for the joy that was set before him, which turns out to be us.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, we're called to be together and to be Jesus to each other, and for plus or minus, depending on your viewpoint, that includes vulnerability.
Right.
In fact, it expects it,
It expects it.
and maybe even goes so far as sort of demands it in a way.
Well, and I think, and we got to wrap up here in a
Yeah.
sec. I think a couple things that, one, I don't think you can get a deeper friendship without vulnerability.
Right.
I think it might happen. It might be very, very minor and then grow very, very minor. But I think that it's just a natural law, kind of, right? Unless you are vulnerable, you won't grow in friendship, because that's how you know the other person. That's how the other person shows that they'll provide for you and care about you,
Yeah.
is by handling your risks appropriately,
Right.
and in a loving way. And then so small group leaders. A couple things I just want you guys to think about. If your small group can take those risks to spend time with each other outside of your designated meeting times, to share some risks outside of maybe their comfort zone a little bit. They should be kind of calculated risks, but to do that. And that then your small group is going to have those opportunities or more of a chance to really grow in those friendships. Something that we see those friendships doing. But if they're not in their prayer time and devotional time on a regular basis, it's going to be very difficult for them to take those risks because they're not necessarily seeing God as being a providing God.
Right.
So we got to wrap this up. We're trying, again, this kind of style for these videos. I know it might not work for everybody, but thank you for experimenting on this with us, and we'll evaluate and kind of switch things as they go along. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time.